Astrophotography is complicated, so I like to keep it simple when and where possible. And one thing I learned when working in professional photography is that you can do almost everything with just a few key tools, even more so these days with the advent of and advancements in digital photography. And when processing video images, curves are king. Combine curves with mass, and you can do almost anything. So today, I'm going to take a demanding subject, the Eastern Veil, and show you how to make the most out of curves and mass. With these simple tools, perhaps with the addition of one or two others, you should be able to develop out of raw images extremely beautiful renditions of any deep sky object, or even planets or moon, or just about anything else. So on the screen in front of us is the Eastern Veil. I shot this image several months ago, right around the beginning of August, on a Player 1 Uranus C, which uses the 585 color sensor, during a night with a 3/4 moon. And I used the ZWO dual-band filter to aggressively remove all but the relevant light to maximize signal-to-noise ratio. To get ready for processing this image, I've already taken care of the preliminaries, and that really wasn't much. Noise, blur, and star exterminator have been run. So the first step we're going to do is stretch it. We're going to take a different approach to stretching than what you may have seen before. We're not going to aim to get a full or maximized stretch. In fact, what we're going to do is very conservatively stretch with the goal of preserving all the data, which is actually going to leave a fairly dim, low contrast image, but that's okay because that's where the power of curves comes into the picture. And my favorite tool for stretching is the histogram transformation. I know, old and basic, but what I like about it is it gives a lot of hands-on manual control. And that's really all we need, because what we're going to do here is very straightforward, very simple. We're going to place our leftmost marker at the left edge of the curve. We want to get it as close to the left edge as possible without at all going into the curve. The left edge establishes the darkest side of the image, and if we start dipping into the left side of that curve, we're actually cutting off data on the low side of the histogram. We're going to do the same thing on the right side of the curve or histogram also. We're going to grab the middle marker and drag it just to the outer right edge of the histogram or curve. We're not going to go into it at all. We do not want to cut off any data. Data is lost information. Losing data can increase contrast, but at the cost of detail. So we're just going to set our markers closer and closer to the curve, zooming in to the histogram as we do so that we can get right to the outer edge of both sides. And when we have the markers right on the outer edge of the left and right side of the histogram, that's where we're done. At that time, we're going to drag the process icon over the image to run the histogram stretch. Now we're going to improve the quality of our dark sky, and we're going to begin this by creating a mask. And the range selection tool is a great tool for quickly creating a mask just perfect for the job. The tool is very simple. It lets us customize bright and dark ranges to mask out. Now here, we want to keep our light areas, or most of them anyway, those star blotches left over from the deconvolution earlier. When I ran the blur exterminator, we'll deal with those later on. But we definitely want to preserve the Eastern Veil. So on the range tool, we're going to raise the lower limit, which will partially or fully mask out the dark regions, and we'll keep on raising it until we reach the outer edges of the Eastern Veil. We'll begin by creating a preview window, and then we'll very carefully start lifting the lower limits of the range until the black areas are touching the outer limits of the veil. Then we'll adjust the fuzziness slider to avoid harsh transitions between the dark and light areas. And we'll raise the smoothness slider to make those transitions more natural. The goal is to mask out as much of the dark area as possible without cutting into the area of our subject, the Eastern Veil. This is an iterative process. Go back and forth, try one thing, try another, restart if you need to, and go until you feel that you have the best possible mask transitioning smoothly between dark and light areas. Or maybe I should say transitioning effectively. Smooth is usually good, but not always. This is editing. There is no always. What looks right, given the current image, the subject matter, and the background, is what's right for the composition. In this case, I found the initial idea I had for the mask to be a bit too aggressive. I don't want the mask to be so aggressive that it blocks out the nebulous material not directly part of the Eastern Veil itself. Ultimately, I want to enhance the Eastern Veil but I still want the entire composition to look natural. And this here looks like the best compromise to me. The dark space is mostly masked out, while the nebulous material, mostly to the left and right sides of the image and a bit to the lower parts, can still show through and be adjusted in editing. Once the composition is where we want it, we'll just run the process, and it will create a mask for us. Then we take the mask tab and drag it just below the image tab in the next frame, and the mask will be applied to our image. You can see it here now. The mask shows up as the red area, meaning if the mask is used in this way, any edits that we make will only be applied to the light or bright areas, which is by and large the eastern veil. We're going to also need to edit the dark areas, but all we have to do that is invert the mask. Now we're going to hide the mask, and here is where we're going to see just how powerful curves are, especially combined with masking. Creative use of curves and masking can perform almost any edit function you might require in developing astrophotography. Now with the mask inverted, edits that we apply to the image will not apply to the light space. We can open up the Curves tool and stretch down, decreasing both luminance and color saturation in the dark space. This will make the darkness prettier, more attractive to the eye, when we finish adjusting the characteristics of the nebula and recombine the stars with the image. The trick here is not to be too aggressive with the curvature. I mean, you could drag the curve all the way down, totally blacking out all that space, but it would create harsh light to dark transitions which don't look natural. We want to increase our contrast, but we need to preserve our sense of dynamic range. When professionals use curves, primarily what they do is decide if they want to increase the entire image's luminance or saturation, or only part of it, or increase contrast. If they want to increase or decrease the entire image's luminance and saturation, they'll drag the curve from somewhere around the middle, up or down. If they want to increase only bright or dark regions or increase contrast, they will create an S-curve. If they want to emphasize bright, the S-curve will rise at the top and lower at the bottom. If they want to do the reverse and brighten dark regions and decrease bright regions, they will create a curve that rises on the low side and goes down on the high or right side. This will also decrease contrast. The right thing to do depends on the composition and what's right to your eye. This also is an iterative process. Take your time and experiment. Then begin to make your curves. Make a point or two and drag till it looks right. If you need more adjustment, pick a point about halfway between two other points. To the right of the curve will correspond to brighter areas, and to the left of the curve will correspond to darker areas. Then drag that point a little up or down, testing till you find the saturation and luminance that you want. Keep doing this, creating new points of adjustment until you get things just like you want. There, I think that's a good degree of change to our darkness. The black of space is blacker, but the transition to darkness is not so strikingly sharp that it creates an artificial feel. Now we're going to apply our edits to the bright region, and we can use the same mask to do this. We'll just invert it. Now the dark space is blocked, and our edits will not apply to anything beyond the range of darkness we selected earlier with the Range tool. By directing PixInsight to show the mask, we can see where our edits will apply. Here, only within the bright range. Now we're going to go ahead and hide the mask, because as we edit the bright range, we want to see clearly how these edits will compare and contrast with the dark space all around. We want to raise the brightness of the nebula, improve the detail, but not have any changes seem so sharp or out there that they seem like unnatural transitions compared to the surrounding space. And here, once again, we are going to see the power of the Curves tool really shine. We want to brighten the entire nebula and also increase its saturation. So we're going to increase the entire curve right around the middle. We can move the curve up and down to experiment until we have the image just where we want it. And along the way, we'll introduce new edit points to the lower and upper sides of the curve to improve detail and emphasize, de-emphasize, sharpen, or blur out transitions as necessary, all up and down the nebula. The RGB/K option adjusts both luminance and saturation. And once we have that where we want it, we're going to take the power of curves even further and become much more specific in our work. Remember, we started off this image with only a basic histogram transformation, being very careful not to cut off any information. And now, fundamentally, we're using the curves feature to continue working with that stretch, but we can be much more specific in how we stretch the image with curves, choosing which qualities of luminance, saturation, and specific color channels we want to emphasize or de-emphasize, and how we want to do that, shaping the curve around our visual desires. Alright, this looks pretty good. Now we're going to switch over to the saturation channel and touch things up a bit more. We're going to drag the saturation channel curve right around the middle and raise it up just a little, increasing the overall color saturation of the nebula. With luminance and saturation nicely adjusted, we're now going to switch over to adjusting specific colors. I know many persons find it somewhat daunting to adjust specific colors, but it really isn't. The challenge with adjusting individual color channels is keeping the color balanced and not getting false colors that you can't later correct. There are 3 color channels: red, green, and blue. Most of the colors that you see in space are going to be red and blue, but with any color image, whether it's created with a monochrome camera or a color camera, green is going to strongly affect how bright the image appears to our eyes. It's just the way human eyes are designed to work. And the green channel can be used to affect the specific values of colors within the image. You can make little adjustments to each of these color channels to enhance the saturation of colors very specifically, and especially use the green channel to emphasize how those colors pop. Just make sure as you go through this process that you try to have the curves of each channel more or less overlaying each other when you're done for color balance. They're certainly going to have to deviate somewhat to attain your goals of emphasizing one color or another. But as long as the color channels roughly overlay each other, when you're done, you'll retain the color balance that gives a natural look. Now in this composition, we have those whitish bright streaks at the top of the nebula, and they're very important to the overall composition. They create a sense of dimensionality with the nebula, standing out strongly over shadowed and red areas. And there is blue hidden away in them that we want to bring out, so we're going to start out by adjusting the blue channel. As you will see, subtle changes to the shape of the overall blue channel has a strong effect on the whiter and pale areas of the nebula, any place where you're likely to find blue hidden in the picture. So what I'm doing is dragging the curve all over the place, looking for the ideal point at which to initiate the curve. That's the point where I feel those lighter, bluer colors become more strongly emphasized, but also creates minimal change to the other color channels. I'm not too worried if I change them, because I can correct that as I continue to work through the channels. But as is the case with so much in photo and video editing, little changes are often best, or at least the best place to start. Once we find a good point, we'll move on to the green channel. Remember, the green channel is going to strongly impact the way the human mind perceives brightness. It's also going to have a strong impact on the luminous qualities of the image, and as you will see, it's really going to bring out the colors on that blue channel, giving them a kind of striking neon effect. I always have fun playing with the effects of the green channel on astro images, so I skipped through a lot of what I was trialing there, and just moved on to the qualities I settled for. What I'm looking for is beautiful color, beautiful saturation, but nothing blown out and nothing hypersaturated. I see a lot of hypersaturated images among photographers these days, both among people shooting ordinary earthly objects, but also astrophotographers. It's not desirable in creating a composition. Oversaturation is a fault similar to over or underexposure. It trades detail, in this case color detail, for what I think of as a momentary sense of color shock value. Good color, occasionally popping, balanced and not overdone is the goal. Now, we're going to adjust the last channel, the red channel. We have 2 goals here: to increase the saturation of the red, make it pop a little more, but our brain perceives its amazing range of over 1 billion colors by how 3 basic colors are recombined. Those 3 basic or primary colors are actually red, yellow, and blue, not red, green, and blue. Green is used as a color channel on modern color cameras because it encompasses everything between red and blue, and because things in the green range have a tremendous effect on how our eyes perceive qualities such as sharpness, brightness, and contrast. If you're interested, check out my videos on one-shot color cameras. In any case, our goal here with adjusting the red channel is to make that red really pop, balance the rest of the color to be found in the nebula so that it looks a bit more natural, and have all the color range overall pop without looking hypersaturated. As always, we do this by creating little steps on the curve. And here, we want the red on both the upper and the lower levels increased a little bit. So we'll create a point to either side of the curve and raise them both a little, And then we want to increase a little bit of contrast between the red regions to emphasize the detail in those areas a bit better. So we'll create a new point between the upper and lower points on the red channel and drag that down just a bit, de-sharpening the middle values of the red range just a little, creating interesting saturation and shadow detail in the middle red range. Now we have completed applying our saturation changes and our individual color channel changes. We have some striking and amazing colors here, and good shadow that brings out dimensionality within the nebula. We're just going to go over to the luminance channel one last time and make a few last tiny adjustments to light and dark within the image. We're looking for that magical place where the nebula will glow, its colors will pop, but it won't be burned out, underdeveloped, or transition too sharply and unnaturally into the regions of space. There, that looks great for the starless part of the image. I thought I might also have to work with the HDR multiscale transform when I started creating this video. But the truth is, I rarely ever have to touch it. An initial conservative histogram transformation, combined with judicious use of masks and curves, virtually always gives me the outcome that I'm looking for. Now, all we have to do is stretch our stars, and then we'll combine the stars back with the image. We're going to take a similar approach with stretching the stars as we did with the nebulous portion of the image. We'll use a simple histogram transformation and drag the left marker right up to the edge of the curve where the light of the stars begins. But on the right, we're going to drag more aggressively. We're not going to worry so much about cutting off anything. Part of that is because we're not going to stretch the stars as much as they could be stretched. We're simply going to stretch them until they all show up and we have a desired level of brightness. As with the histogram transformation on the nebulous portion of the image, this will be a conservative transformation. We're just going to bring all the stars into the image, and then we'll refine this transformation with the curves tool. If you've ever wondered how much to stretch back the stars, how bright to make them, that honestly depends on you. How much do you want to emphasize their presence in the image? Many people like to image the beauty of nebulae and strongly focus on them, so you might de-emphasize the brightness of the stars. If you want a more balanced composition, make them brighter. Sometimes, depending on the image, I might want to show every star possibly there, and so I greatly ramp up their brightness so that even the dimmest show. The right choice is the one that you like. With our stellar histogram transformation done, we're now going to switch back to curves and open a preview window. Here we're going to make a delicate S-curve on the luminance channel to emphasize the brighter stars just a little, and darkening the lower area will sharpen the image a bit, creating a kind of deconvolution effect. Once we have the luminance curve where we want it, we're going to switch over to the saturation channel, grab the curve from the middle, and drag it up until we can just but clearly see the red in the red stars, and if there are blue stars, them too. We want to bring up the saturation so that their color shows, without oversaturating to the point that it appears unnatural. There, that looks pretty good. Now, we're going to merge the stars back with the nebula image. However, I don't ever do this in PixInsight. PixInsight's an incredible tool for developing astrophotography images, but to be both frank and honest, it's not the best at recompositing images together. My favorite tool is Affinity Photo, which gives many options and you can see the outcomes immediately. And compositing is such a powerful photo editing tool, you want to be able to experiment and see those options immediately. So I find that I always get better outcomes when bringing stars back into the image by just recompositing them through Affinity Photo. By the way, if you use Photoshop, you'll know how to use Affinity Photo. The way they work, even their layout is very similar. And the great thing is, you can buy Affinity Photo, I think it's $60 or $70 when it's on sale, about $100 when it isn't, and it is a one-time purchase. You can use it from then on forever, none of this monthly payment junk. So, let's jump over to Affinity Photo. I can use the snap and drag tools to just drag the stars to where they should be, right over the nebulous image, and now it's perfectly aligned. I don't want to risk introducing permanent changes to my original nebulous image, so I'm just going to duplicate it, or I should say, duplicate that layer, and then I'm going to make the original layer invisible so it's not accidentally worked with. And now I'll pop back up to the star layer and decide which compositing technique I want to go with. There are dozens of compositing options available. Most are intended for some specific special effect. Lighten, screen, color dodge, add, and lighten color are generally the ones used for ordinary compositing. Some emphasize contrast, some emphasize bright areas, some look for balance, some emphasize color, and the right one is the one that works best with the image. In this instance, I think the screen composites option works best. It shows the nebula, brings out the dimensionality, really works well with the darks, and doesn't enhance contrast so much that the image suffers over rapid transitions. Now I'm just going to use Affinity Photo's brilliant implementation of an editing tool called the inpainting brush to correct any overbright, washed out, and deconvoluted stars. And if you're curious how that works, let me know and we can go over it in a future video. And there you have it, a beautiful image of the Eastern Veil, made in 20 minutes, well, minus the time that it took for Noise Exterminator, Blur Exterminator, and Star Exterminator to do their processing. But after that was done, all the editing took 20 minutes. And almost all that editing was just done with curves and masks. Master curves, and learn to use those curves with masks. And, no pun intended, the sky is the limit. Now get out there and shoot the sky.